Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We're going to continue with our Sira class. Let's begin with a quick Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. When we left off last week, we were talking about the Prophet's trip to Ta'if with Zayd ibn Haritha, the revelation of Surah Al-Jinn, which came after the people of Ta'if treated him very poorly. We spoke about how they began to stone him. They sent the children after him to stone him and Zayd, and how the leaders of that town, they treated him very harshly. They said very, disrespectful and rude things to him. And then they sent the young people of the city after him, chasing him and stoning him. They had no idea that many years later, they will be sending a delegation to him trying to make peace negotiations many years later. But at this time, they just saw him as someone that they could, abuse, and they took every advantage of that. And they did abuse him and almost killed him. Him and Zayd took refuge inside of a garden, and he spoke for a little while with a Christian slave or servant who was working there. And then he left, and that's when he received the revelation of Surah Al-Jinn, letting him know that there were these creatures called jinn who were listening to him recite the Quran, and that many of them had accepted Islam. So now we return to Mecca. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and Zayd, they returned to Mecca, and you can imagine how depressed, or at least how, I won't say depressed, but how upset, how discouraged they may have been. They were hoping that maybe they would have received a positive response from Ta'if, but instead they were treated in a very horrible and harsh manner. And now they have to come to Mecca, and all the burdens that are happening over there with the oppression and the persecution and the finger pointing and the name calling and all the other things he has to deal with. And he doesn't have the support of his uncle anymore, nor his wife Khadija, because they have both died. So you can imagine how low his morale must have been. He has barely 100 followers, and many of them are in hiding or have to hide their faith, or they're being oppressed, or they have to go through all sorts of, strange measures to just to be able to pray. They have to pray in secret. And even though he does have the support of Umar ibn Khattab and his uncle Hamza ibn Abi Talib, still they're still an oppressed minority inside of Mecca. And so things are really not looking good for the Messenger of Allah right now. Things are really looking down. This was the end of the 10th year, which is called the year of grief, or the year of sorrow. And these three events, the death of his uncle and death of Khadija, and then the bad reception at Ta'if, kind of culminates everything there. But now they come back to Mecca, and the Hajj season is coming up, or the pilgrimage season is coming up. And he wants to once again go back and try to spread the message of Islam among the different people who are coming from all over the Arabian Peninsula into Mecca to make pilgrimage to the Hajj. Now, there are two events we have to talk about here. The Prophet's delegation, or the Prophet's attempt at preaching during the Hajj season, and also Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, which is the night travel and the Ascension. Both of these happened in the 11th year of the message. Now, there's dispute about which came first, whether Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj was before the Hajj and afterwards. No one really knows exactly when it is. So scholars have tried their best to piece it together based on different hadiths, but no one knows exactly what month it took place. So we're just going to have to do our best. But I'm going to go with the assumption, basically, that the Hajj season happened first, and then Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj happened afterwards. And there's really no way to really know, so you can take it either way. And both have validity. And Allah only truly knows best. Unfortunately, the records were not kept at that time. So during this Hajj season now, after return from Ta'if, the Prophet then he goes to the different tribes that are coming into Mecca. And As I mentioned before, Mecca was a Hajj, it was a pilgrimage destination, and all of these tribes are coming in from all over Arabia. Now, Mecca is somewhere on the western, close to the western coast of the Arabian Peninsula, but people are coming from as far south as Yemen, as far north as Syria. People are coming from all over to make pilgrimage to the Kaaba to pray to their deities and all that stuff. So one of the hopes that a prophet had would that he would be able to convince one of these tribes, one of these visiting tribes, or some people from one of these visiting tribes, to accept Islam and maybe give him and his followers some refuge. And so he is going from he did this before on some of the previous Hajj seasons as well, but he may not have had much of a chance to do that during the previous 3 years because of the boycott, and that may have held him back from doing it, because at that time they were just trying to survive. There wasn't much they can do even with as far as trying to spread the message. At that point in time, it was just a matter of survival. But now the boycott is over, and so he goes to the Kaaba precincts and begins to talk to the people there. But by and large, he talks to tribe after tribe after tribe, people after people. The vast majority of them did not accept the message. There were a few exceptions, however. One of the most notable exceptions was a man named Abu Dharr al-Ghifari. Now, al-Ghifari was his tribal name. That was the name of his tribe. He came from the tribe of al-Ghifar. And the Ghifar tribe was known, they were like highway robbers. They were like bandits. You could imagine, if you ever saw the movie with Mel Gibson with the Terrordrome, or it was after the apocalypse came, and people made their life basically by looting other people and robbing other people's, goods and stuff. And that's how you had these highway robbers. They rode on motorcycles in the movie. Well, al-Ghifari, they rode on camels and stuff, and their whole thing, their business was robbery. That's all they did. They didn't have trade. They didn't grow plants. They didn't grow food. Their business was your business, which was basically robbing your business. And that's all they did. And Abu Dharr came from this kind of tribe. You can imagine then that a person who comes from this tribe would have to naturally be pretty harsh and pretty rough. And Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, as seen in the Sirah, in the history of Islam, even after the death of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, was a very harsh critic of other Muslims who did not live up to certain standards. Now, Abu Dharr, before he actually became Muslim, he had heard about this man in Mecca saying all these things about there's one God and you got to stop worshiping these idols, and it piqued his interest. He was curious about it. He was not your typical highway robber. Now, I guess the average highway robber, the only thing they're concerned about is looting the next caravan. Abu Dharr, he was more of a spiritual person, and he was always a bit of an odd person as far as his tribe was concerned, but he still had the genetics of a highway robber, even though he did not, as far as we know, he did not involve himself in that. He was not involved in that activity himself. It was still part of his culture and his DNA. So he had that roughness to him that anyone growing up in that society would be. But he's always a bit odd. And even when you read his Sirah, or you read his life history, compared to the other companions, compared to the Ansar, and compared to the Muhajirun, he was always a little bit different. Not weird different, but he just stood out a little bit differently from everybody else. But in any case, he heard about the message of Islam, heard about Prophet Muhammad, and so he came to Mecca to try and find out about him, and try to find out more. Well, actually, first he sent his brother. He sent his brother to Mecca to try and find out more about him. And his brother came to Mecca for the Hajj season, and then came back to the tribe of Ghifar and told Abu Dharr, well, there's this man, he says, enjoin good and forbid evil. And Abu Dharr, being the rough, direct to the point person he was, says, you haven't told me anything. You're not doing me any good. Let me go do this on my own. And so he leaves his tribe and goes to Mecca to try and find out on his own. He sent his brother to get the information. The brother gave him one line: enjoin what is right, forbid what is evil. That's not enough. He needs more information. He needs to know for sure. He needs to get some concrete information right from the source. And so he comes to Mecca to try to find out on his own what this whole thing about Islam and this Muhammad guy, what it's all about. So he comes to Mecca, and at first he doesn't know where to go, so he just stays in the Kaaba precincts, and he lives off of Zamzam water. He was actually drinking the water from the well of Zamzam and was living off of that, not eating any food, just living off of the water in and of itself from Zamzam. Eventually, however, he begins to ask people about who's this Muhammad guy, and it's like he asks one question too many, and then suddenly everyone in Mecca, well, not everyone, but all of the enemies of Islam, they pounce on him. Now remember, Abu Dharr is not from Mecca. He doesn't have any protection. He's a stranger. It's outside the Hajj season, so all bets are off now. He doesn't have the protection of the sanctity of the holy months or anything like that, or the sacred months. He doesn't have any of those protections. And so when he starts asking all these questions, you can imagine somebody walking into hostile territory and asking all the wrong questions. You're going to eventually bring the wrong attention to yourself. And he did this. And all the enemies of Islam pounced on him and began to beat him and beat him and beat him. But eventually, Al-Abbas, who was another uncle of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and some people say that he may have taken his Islam, taken Shahada in secret, but we don't really know. He did eventually become Muslim, of course, definitely out and out Muslim after the conquest of Mecca. There's no doubt about it then. But even during this time, there is some dispute about whether he may have just taken Shahada and may have hidden it. But Al-Abbas, he saw the people beating on Abu Dharr, and he rushed out there and he said, "Don't you know what you're doing? This guy is from al-Ghifari. He's from the tribe of Ghifari. If you hurt this guy, our caravans will not be safe. They will tear us apart." And remember, Mecca's business is caravans, it's trade. And so they get on the wrong side of the Ghifar tribe, they can forget it. These guys are going to hit them every single time they step foot outside of Mecca. They're going to hit them if they kill one of their brethren. And so the Meccans hear this and they kind of back off and they realize that they got to be careful with this guy. Now, Abu Dharr, just so you know, he does eventually meet with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he does accept Islam. He goes back to his tribe of al-Ghifar, and these highway robbers, these professional career bandits, he manages to spread the message of Islam to all of them, and the entire tribe accepts Islam. It took many years now. It didn't happen all right away, but still, they all wound up accepting Islam. And after the Prophet moved to Medina, we'll get to probably in another couple of classes. After Prophet moved to Medina, Abu Dharr eventually came to Medina with about 70 families from his tribe who had accepted Islam. So this goes to show that it doesn't really matter what someone's background is. The people of Mecca were the noblest of people. They were the noblest of the Arabs. They had the Kaaba in their midst. Many of them were great with poetry. They were in a very professional field of trade, a very respected and professional field of trade. Everyone respected them, yet they had to be dragged kicking and screaming into Islam. They didn't accept Islam until the Prophet brought an army of 20,000 people to their doorstep. Then they wanted to accept Islam. Whereas the Ghifar tribe, this tribe of professional bandits, professional highway robbers, they accept Islam simply on the word of their brother Abu Dharr. Now, it did take some convincing. He had to talk to them for a long time, but they did eventually come to Islam, and it didn't take an army of 20,000 people to bring them into Islam. So it goes to show that just because someone is educated doesn't mean they're necessarily intelligent. Or just because someone has a high status in society doesn't mean that they're necessarily noble. The people of Ghifar, they accepted Islam before the people of Mecca did. And so really, faith is in the hands of Allah. That's what the overall lesson for this is. But Abu Dharr was an exception to the rule. Most of the people who came through Mecca did not accept Islam. Most of the pilgrims who came through Mecca did not accept Islam. And the Prophet would go to tribe after tribe and talk to them. But most of them either rejected him outright, or they were kind, but gave him a polite rejection notice, like, "Thank you for coming out, but we decided to go a different way." Maybe a kind rejection, but still rejection. One exception was one Sahaba named Tufail ibn Amr. He was from the Daws tribe. He did hear the message of Islam, and he did Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. He did accept Islam, and he then went. He was from a tribe called Daus, which is outside of Mecca. He did accept Islam, and then he also went and spread the message to his immediate family. His parents accepted Islam, and then his wife also accepted Islam. And then after the Hajj season was over, he went back to his tribe. His tribe, however, was more resistant than Abu Dharr's tribe. Abu Dharr's tribe came around within a couple of years, but Tufail's tribe, they didn't come around so quickly. And there's even a hadith where Tufail, he came back to, I think it was Medina. At the time, he came to meet the Prophet Muhammad SAW in Medina at one point and was complaining about his people. They just won't accept Islam. I'm giving them the truth. I'm talking to them. They just will not accept it. And then he asked the Prophet, ask Allah to curse them for not accepting Islam. Ask Allah to send his wrath upon them. Instead, however, Prophet Muhammad SAW made dua for them that they will be guided to the light of Islam. And sure enough, eventually, the entire tribe of Daus accepted Islam as well. But this was many years later. But still, they all became Muslim. And this is just one exception to the rule of the vast majority of people who were making that pilgrimage to Mecca during this 11th year. And most of them rejected Prophet Muhammad SAW, but Abu Dharr and Tufail were some of the exceptions. There was one more exception. Now, this is the most important one of all. The news of Prophet Muhammad's message was starting to spread now around the Arabian Peninsula. And there were some people who lived in a small, not much more than a village called Yathrib, about 150 miles or so away from Mecca. This small village was mostly comprised of two tribes. One tribe called Aus and one tribe called Khazraj. And these guys were always at each other's throat. They had gone through generations and generations of warfare. You know the popular story, the Hatfield and McCoys here in the United States, of these two families who are always in persistent family feud. Well, the Aus and the Khazraj were the Arabian version of the Hatfield and McCoys multiplied by 100, because these guys weren't just, and this wasn't just legend. These guys were in absolute warfare for generations, and it was to the point they had killed most of their fighting men had been killed in battle with these two guys fighting each other. So the Aus and the Khazraj, they had kind of got tired of killing each other by this time, and they wanted to know there's some way that they could stop all this stuff. Also within their city lived several Jewish tribes. And the Jewish tribes, they had nothing to do with the fighting. They took sides based on whichever one was more convenient, whoever gave them the better deal. The Jewish tribes took tribe, they I won't say they were instigators, but they were opportunists as far as the war between the Aus and the Khazraj was. Now the Hajj season comes along, and 6 people from Medina go to Mecca in the hope of maybe they can hear something about this guy who's talking about not worshiping idols and only worshiping one God, and he says he's a prophet. And they do this because they had grown up around the Jewish tribes. We mentioned they had these Jewish tribes already. They already had the societal problems. Their societies, big rifts. There's torn apart, people killing each other. This constant family feud between these two tribes is going on and on and on. But they also grew up around these Jewish tribes, and the Jewish tribes were monotheists. Of course, they worshipped Allah only. They had their own problems as far as Aqidah and behavior and character was concerned, but they were monotheists. They did have the message of Tawheed. They were constantly warning the Aus and the Khazraj who lived in Yathrib. They were constantly warning them, the Jews they were constantly warning them that one day our prophet is going to come. They knew that there was still another prophet to come. And how they knew this, Allah knows best. But the Jews have a long history of what's called Kabbalah, being able to use the Hebrew scripture to. They also have a long history of fortune telling, period, and magic and sorcery from their days in Egypt, when they were slaves in Egypt. They have a long history from that. But they also, the Jews have been around for over 1,000 years, even the time Prophet Muhammad came around. So they have a long history of fortune telling and sorcery and black magic. And like I said, they've also had what they learned from the Egyptians during the many centuries that they were in slavery, and also not in slavery in Egypt as well. So the Jews, they knew a little bit about foretelling the future and knowing how to read future events and reading the stars and all this sort of stuff, astronomy and stuff like that. And they were telling them that, one day we got a prophet coming by. We got a new prophet coming through soon. And when he comes, you Arabs, you think you got the upper hand right now because there's more of you. But when our prophet comes, we are going to wipe you out and we are taking over. And so the Aus and the Khazraj, they were always kind of worried about this because they were always around these Jews. They were kind of worried. The Jews were very educated. They could read and write. They spoke several languages. They spoke Arabic, obviously. They spoke Hebrew. They could read and write both languages. They always seemed to be very educated. They had the most money. They always seemed to get into these really advantageous deals with the Arabs where they would charge riba and interest, and the Arabs, no matter how much they would do, they always seemed to be in debt to the Jews. So they looked up to the Jews with respect because the Jewish tribes in the area seemed to have upper hand on them. Whereas the Arabs are fighting each other and killing each other, talking about the Aus and the Khazraj. Whereas the Aus and the Khazraj were fighting and killing each other and destroying their society, the Jews were getting rich. They had huge orchards, well-built fortresses. They were doing pretty good, and they were very well educated compared to the Arabs who were still worshiping stones and bricks and stuff. And so the Arabs look up to the Jews. And so when they told them that we got a prophet coming through, and when he comes, we're going to wipe you guys out, they took it seriously. So when they heard about this guy in Mecca saying he's a prophet, they were thinking maybe we should go and check this guy out and see if maybe, he would help us out rather than go and help the Jews, or at least maybe give us some sort of concession if he is going to really go help the Jews. So they went to Mecca for the Hajj pilgrimage, and eventually the two sides meet. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and Abu Bakr meet with the 6 members from the tribe of, there was, I believe, 4 from the tribe of Khazraj and 2 from the tribe of Aus. 6 members in total from Yathrib. And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, they all met together. Now, it is unlikely that anyone here in this meeting of 8 people knew the repercussions and the significance of this meeting. I don't think any of them knew that this one little meeting between these 2 groups would lead to events that would change the history of the world forever. I can't say if any of them knew. Maybe Prophet Muhammad ﷺ knew. Allah knows best. Everybody else, there's no way they could have known that this one little meeting right here would change history forever after that. But nonetheless, they met. And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ began to preach to them about Islam. And the Aus and the Khazraj, remember, they're in a pretty bad state. They just got through another terrible war, battle with each other. And so they are desperate for some sort of leadership, something to unify them. And also they're still kind of worried about that prophecy from the Jews saying that they got a prophet coming through. So they talk about it amongst themselves, and they're like, what if this is that guy? What if this is that guy that the Jews have been talking about? What if this is that prophet who they say is going to come and lead them to victory over us? Maybe, we can be early investors. You know how it is when a company goes public, the people who invest early, they're the ones who make out with the most money. And so they're thinking, not in terms of financial money, of course, but they are definitely concerned about their own well-being. They're like, maybe we should get the jump on this and join this guy right now before he meets with the Jews and they go and claim him for their own. And so they're convinced of Islam. They're convinced that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is a prophet of Allah, and they accept Islam, and they promise to go back to Yathrib, their village, and spread the message amongst their people. And like I said, it's impossible to know if anybody knew the things that will come out from this one meeting. I just can't imagine anyone else except for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam knowing how significant that one meeting in the precincts of the Kaaba during the pilgrimage season in Mecca over 1400 years ago would have meant so much to so many people, would have changed the world and affected the lives of billions of people going forward. And Allah knows best. But the people of Yathrib, they go back, the Aus and the Khazraj, those 6 members, they go back to Yathrib and they began to spread the message amongst their people. And like the tribe of Abu Dharr, they began to accept, the people are much more open and much more acceptable to the message of Islam. And many of families within the city of Yathrib began, or really more of a village of Yathrib, began to accept Islam. And Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he doesn't know all this is happening. You know, they don't have cell phones. People couldn't send messages back and forth saying that, you know, your message is doing pretty good here. We got about 6 converts today. We got 5 converts yesterday. There's no way for him to know that. So after the people of Yathrib went back to their hometown and after the pilgrimage was over, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had to go about business as usual. But when someone's a prophet, there is no such thing as business as usual. And now we begin to enter the story of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj. This story is very popular. It is an important part of Muslim history. I'm going to send you a link where you can read the hadith from Sahih Bukhari about the whole event of Isra wal Mi'raj. But I will go over it. Briefly. I'm not going to go into all the details because you can read the hadith, and I'm not going to read the hadith to you. So you can read the hadith if you want to get more details to it. But Al-Isra wal Mi'raj, let's understand the meaning of it first. Al-Isra means night journey. It means the night journey. Isra means night journey. Mi'raj means ascension or going up. Anzal means coming down. Mi'raj means going up. And so it was the night journey, which was the journey at night that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam made from the Kaaba to Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. And then al-Mi'raj was traveling through the 7 heavens through the 7 heavens until he actually was in the presence of Allah. And we'll go through that very quickly right now, inshallah. So in the hadith, an angel comes and opens up Prophet Muhammad's chest and washes his heart with water from Zamzam. And then he instructs him to mount on this beast called a Buraq. And this beast is larger than a donkey, but smaller than a mule. And a mule is a hybrid between a donkey and a horse. So it's basically a medium-sized horse-like animal, but it's not exactly a horse. And this animal travels extremely fast. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam described it as traveling as far as the eye can see in one stride. I look at that as basically traveling instantaneously, because if you look at it, he travels as far as the eye can see in one stride. That seems like traveling one place to another almost instantaneously, light speed practically. And light travels like 800 miles per second, something like that. So he got on this animal and he's whisked over to Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. And then he ascends through the 7 heavens. And this is something that you can't really explain physically. And that is also one of the questions about Al-Isra wal Mi'raj, whether it was a physical travel or whether it was a spiritual travel. And most scholars seem to say there was actually both. It was both spiritual and physical. There are some who say it was only spiritual, and I don't know if anyone says only physical. I'll say it could be just physical. But anyway, it was spiritual and physical in the fact that Allah knows best. Perhaps the travel from Kaaba to Jerusalem was physical, whereas the travel through the 7 heavens was spiritual. Allah knows best. The point is that he did travel through the 7 heavens. And as he goes through the 7 heavens, he meets the other prophets who came before him. He meets Adam alayhi salam. He meets Yunus alayhi salam. He meets Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. He meets Musa alayhi salam. He meets Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. He meets Harun, Aaron alayhi salam. He meets all the prophets not all the prophets. He meets several prophets through the different heavens as it goes through the different heavens. He also sees some of the punishment that people will experience in the next life. He sees the punishment for people who backbite. He sees the punishment for people who eat the treasure or the wealth of orphans unjustly. He sees the punishment for those people who commit zina, which is illegal sexual intercourse, fornication, or adultery. He sees the punishment that these people will go through. He sees the children who have died in childhood, and he sees them with Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. He sees many wonderful things. He sees the mystical lote tree, which is known as Sidratul Muntaha. He sees the mystical lote tree in heaven as well. He also sees Baytul Ma'mur, which is the highest abode, or the highest level of paradise, in which the hadith says that 70,000 angels pass through Baytul Ma'mur, the highest abode, every day. And they see it and they can never come back, because that's it. That's the only chance to see it. So 70,000 angels see Baytul Ma'mur, and then they go on. And another 70,000 come for their turn. And it is really an amazing experience. And then the most important thing from us from a fiqh and sharia standpoint is when he's within the presence of Allah, and Allah gives him the commandment for Muslims to pray 50 times a day. And so he gets this order from Allah, and he begins to descend back down through the heavens. And then Musa stops him. And Musa like, hold on, wait. What did your Lord tell you? And the prophet tells him that he ordered my people to pray 50 times a day. And Musa, he knows what it is about people, and he had himself some hard-headed people himself in the children of Israel. He's like, your people cannot handle it. Take it from someone who knows. They cannot handle it. It's too much for them. Go back to your Lord and ask him to reduce it. And so Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, well, he knows more than I do, or he's been prophet longer than I have. Let me go back to Allah and ask him. So he goes back to Allah, and Allah gives him a concession and reduces it down to 40. He comes back through, and Musa meets him again. And he's like, well, what did your Lord tell you this time? He said, well, he lowered it down to 40. He's like, no, still too much. Go back and see if he can lower it down some more. So Prophet Muhammad goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and asks him again to lower it down. He lowers it down to 30. This goes back and forth. Every time Prophet Muhammad says, Musa tells him, your people cannot handle it. You got to lower it down. Trust me, I know. My people are some of the most hard-headed and hard-backed people you could imagine. They can't handle it. You got to get it down lower. And go back and forth. Musa would suggest he goes back to Allah and get it lowered down some. Prophet Muhammad go back, get it lowered down by about 5 or 10. Come back to Musa. Musa says, it's still not enough. It's still too much. Bring it down some more. This kept on happening until it got down to 5. And Musa is saying, it's still too much. You got to go back and get him to lower it down some more. But Prophet Muhammad said, no, that's it. I can't. I'm too ashamed to go back anymore. That's it. But Allah blessed the prayer in the fact that every prayer is worth 10 times its amount if it's done properly. And so even though we only have to pray 5 times a day now, through the mercy of Allah, your 5 daily prayers can be worth 50 daily prayers. What this shows us is, for one thing, the importance of prayer. This is something that was communicated directly to the Messenger of Allah, directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's differences of opinions. Ibn Abbas and Aisha, they differed as to whether Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually saw Allah. Ibn Abbas said he did. Aisha, his wife, said he did not. Most scholars agree with Aisha that he did not see Allah directly. And there's a hadith that kind of indicates he didn't see Allah directly, because he was asked about it. And Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, I couldn't see anything. There was only light. How could I see anything? And so that's indication that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly, but he was just in the presence of Allah, and Allah gave him the orders in a way that befits his majesty. So Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam now has the orders, and this is just an example, or one more indication of how important prayer is for Muslims. It came directly from Allah. You have Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Musa negotiating and going back and forth on this thing. And Allah and His mercy lowered it down from 50 down to 5. And out of shyness, Prophet Muhammad SAW would not go back and get it lowered down even more. So I don't think there can be any doubt as to the importance and role of prayer as Muslims. This is not something that just came out of Prophet Muhammad SALL's mind. It is not something he just made up just to try and give us some discipline. This was an order directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we kind of have to do it. You kind of have to do the prayer. All the 5 pillars have to be done, but the prayer especially needs to be taken seriously. Once again, it's a direct order from Allah to His messenger, and not just through the Quran, even though coming through the Quran is just as important, directly communicated to Prophet Muhammad SAW, and now brought back to us, and we have to do this. So Prophet Muhammad SAW returns, and he goes back down through the 7 heavens, back to Masjid al-Aqsa, then makes the trip back to the Kaaba, and he arrives back in the Kaaba. Now on his travel through the in his travel from Jerusalem back to Mecca, he saw a caravan that's on its way to Mecca, and this plays an important role in a few minutes. We'll see how that plays an important role. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he arrives back in Mecca, and you can imagine how he feels. He's like, I don't want to use the word stoked, but he is full of confidence now. After all the difficulty he's gone through, 3 years of boycott, all of the persecution him and his followers have been through, going from tribe to tribe to tribe, and most of them rejecting him, going to Ta'if and having them stone him and chase him out of the town, barely with his life. You can, after going through all that, and Allah sends this mercy down to him. This is such a morale booster for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you can imagine how full of confidence, and like I said, I don't want to use the word stoked, but you can see how stoked and confident he was that Allah is with him. He always knew Allah was with him, but his morale is now at a much higher level. And he knows that this message has to go on, and he has to find a way to keep it going on. And that's why some people say that this may have happened before that Hajj pilgrimage, when so many people were coming into Mecca, because people say that this was this gave them the impetus and the courage to go, and the encouragement to go through the tribes and who are coming to Hajj and preach to them confidently. And Allah knows best which came first and which came afterwards. In the end, it doesn't really matter. The point is that this was a morale booster for him. You also should know that Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj was not meant to convince the pagans of the truthfulness of the message of Islam. It was not meant for them. It was meant for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a morale booster for him. The Quraysh, in fact, when they heard about it, they were actually kind of happy. Now, you can imagine the pagan Quraysh. Now, the enemies of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they're going through now 11 years of trying to get rid of this guy. 11 years of first just talking about him, then spreading lies about him, then outright persecuting him and his followers, then trying to starve them out of existence, and then boycotting him. They've done everything they could to get rid of this guy, to shut him up. And then you can imagine how happy they are when he comes up with this fantastic story, this unbelievable story of him traveling from Mecca to Jerusalem all in one night, and then beyond that, going up through these things called the 7 heavens, which they have no idea about. You can imagine, this is like, to them, from their perspective, it's like he just gave them a gift. It's like, you could not have said anything better. And they take this and they run with it. And the first person they go to when they hear about this. Now, first of all, when Prophet Muhammad came back from Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, he told his cousin about it, and she warned him, don't let the word about this get out. If they hear about it, they're going to use it against you. But Allah knows best the reason why, maybe because he was just super confident now. He did tell some people, and the word did get out. And when Abu Jahl and the others heard about this, they were like, this is like manna from heaven. They were just so happy that he could give them this, because now they had more artillery from their perspective that they could use against Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now it wasn't just them saying all sorts of crazy things about him. Now he was the one who, from their perspective, was now looking crazy, who was now looking like the liar. And now they have something to use against him. And they run to Abu Bakr. They want to get to him before Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam gets him. They said, we got to get to Abu Bakr. That's the strongest supporter now that Abu Talib and Khadijah are gone. Abu Bakr is the staunchest supporter. So they run to Abu Bakr and they go to him and they say, have you heard? Have you heard the news? Do you hear what your buddy is saying, what your companion is saying? Abu Bakr hasn't heard anything yet. He's dealing with his daily business. He hasn't heard anything yet. And they run to him and they tell him, well, have you heard what your friend is saying? And then they tell him that he says, get this, man. He says he traveled from Mecca to Jerusalem, which is a trip that usually takes several weeks. We know this. We have caravans. We do this trip every single year, multiple times a year. We know that even in the best of conditions, with the fastest camels and the lightest loads, this is the trip that takes several weeks. And he's saying he did this in one day, one night. Do you really believe this guy now? Do you really think that he's telling the truth now? Now, Abu Bakr now, he knows who he's talking to. He's talking to Abu Jahl, the father of ignorance. He knows the kind of people he's dealing with. Abu Bakr is no fool whatsoever. He actually is a very wise person. He knows that this may just be a trick from the Quraysh trying to get him to say something that they can use against the Messenger of Allah. Or maybe it's some other, maybe they misunderstood something. Maybe it's something from the revelation. He doesn't know what it is yet, but he knows he can't trust these Quraysh. He can't trust these pagans after all the stuff they've done. He knows he can't trust them. So he says the wisest thing of all. He says, if Muhammad said it, then it's true. And he says that to let them know that I'm not necessarily going to believe what you say, but I'm not going to disbelieve it either, because maybe he did say that. And if he said it, then it's true. But maybe you're making something up. And so I'm not going to commit 100%. But if my prophet, the prophet of Allah said this, then I'm going to believe him, no matter how strange it may sound to you. Now, Abu Bakr, of course, he eventually does hear from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam directly, and he does believe it, and he accepts the message. He accepts that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam went on Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, and that's that. Now, as far as the other evidence of Prophet Muhammad's trip to Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, he mentioned that on his way back, he passed by the caravan, and he told the people of Mecca that there's a caravan coming that they were not aware of was coming. They didn't know it was coming. They didn't expect it to come, but he told them it was coming because he had seen on his way back. And so when he did this, this was an evidence that he was actually telling the truth. Also, they wanted to ask him about the windows in one of the buildings. I guess Masjid al-Aqsa. They asked him about the windows in one of the buildings in Jerusalem, but Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't know the answer to that question, and so Allah sent Jibril to give him the correct number because either he didn't see it or he wasn't paying attention, but he didn't know the exact number of windows in whatever building that they were talking about. Remember, Abu Jahl and the others were all merchants. They had been back and forth to Jerusalem many times, and so they knew the area fairly well. And so when they asked him this to challenge him, how many windows does such and such building have? They were doing this just to try to prove that Prophet Muhammad was lying or was crazy or whatever, but he didn't know. But Allah sent Jibril with the correct answer. Right, as far as the caravan, the Prophet Muhammad, he saw the caravan that was coming over that night, and he had specific details about it. He knew the type of camels that it was carrying. He knew about the load that it was carrying. He knew how many were there, because he had seen all this in his travel. And so he told them about this, and sure enough, later that same day, the caravan does come, and it is exactly as he described it. Yet still, the Quraysh still did not believe him. Now, the importance of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj cannot be overstated. One of the most important things is that it links these two holy buildings, Al-Kaaba and Masjid al-Aqsa. It links them as two houses of worship. It also links the cities of Mecca and Jerusalem. And for many years, for several years, don't say many years, for several years, Masjid al-Aqsa was the Qibla. It was the first Qibla, the first direction of prayer for the Muslims. And this was an honor that Allah gave to Bani Israel, but they lost that honor because of their own arrogance and because of the refusal to accept the message of Islam. We have to keep in mind that Islam is not something new and separate. It is the same religion that was practiced and preached by all the messengers of Allah. So there may have been people who take the message of Islam and change it into Christianity, or change it into Judaism, or change it into this and change it into that. There's always the same message of Tawheed. And so for those people who are not Muslim, it's not as if you're asking them to convert from one religion to another. We're asking them to accept the truth of what they already believe and purify it. So all they're doing is the truth of what they already believe in monotheism. They're already Jewish or Christian. They already have evidence of monotheism. They just have to purify it, and Islam purifies it. This is the truth of what they're already believing. So it's not like we're asking them to convert from one thing to something totally different, though I understand that from their perspective, it may look like that because they have to take on so many new duties and some things have to change in their lifestyle, but that's only because they are perfecting their worship. And so when the Jews did not accept Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, this was their second chance at getting a prophet because they rejected Isa ﷺ, and then they reject Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And so by this time, their arrogance was just way overboard. And so they lost the honor of having the Qibla. And from the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to now, Mecca has been the Qibla for Muslims and will be until the Day of Judgment. And so they've lost that honor. That's something that they can only blame themselves for. As we already mentioned, another important lesson from Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj was it shows the links and the connection between all the prophets. And we spoke about this just a few seconds ago. It shows that all the prophets, they were not preaching Christianity or Judaism. They were all preaching Islam, submission to Allah. They're all preaching worship Allah alone. And that is something that all the prophets were taught and all of them preached. And that is why the prophets were brothers in a sense, not obviously not genetic brothers, but brothers but spiritual brothers in a sense. And this is why they were so happy to see Prophet Muhammad when he came through he came through the seven heavens. Many of them greeted him and they're happy to see him. And Musa alayhi salam, he even cried when he saw him because he knew that his people had lost the message and that his people were not going to be the saved people that they thought they were. And he knew that Prophet Muhammad was coming with the final truth. And he cried out of sadness for the loss that his people would have, Bani Israel. And so Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj shows the connection and the links between all the prophets. And we also already mentioned how it shows the importance of prayer and how prayer is a fundamental part of the Muslim life. And we also spoke about how Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj was not meant to be something to convince the Quraysh about the truthfulness of Islam. It was meant as a morale booster for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's going to pretty much end our class for today. Just one last thing is that also not too long after this, the Prophet married Aisha radiallahu anha, the daughter of Abu Bakr. But we're going to have to spend some time on that one. So we're going to do that one next week, inshallah. Only reason I want to spend more time on that one because it's a controversial issue. I want to deal with it in depth. I don't want to breeze over it. But it's something that we do need to discuss, and we will discuss it inshallah in the next class. So at this point in time, we are finished with we're finished with everything that I have scheduled. I don't have anything else scheduled for right now. What we do know is that while the Prophet is going through Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, and while the people are debating whether they should accept him or not, unbeknownst to anyone there in Medina, well, right now it's still called Yathrib. In the little town of Yathrib, those 6 people are busy preaching the message of Islam and converting dozens and dozens of people to Islam, spreading the message, and many people are coming to Islam. So much so that within a year, that group of 6 people will come back as 70. And as I mentioned already before, while all these things are happening, I don't think anybody knew the repercussions that these events will have. And Allah knows best. Any questions as for now before we end the class? Wa iyyakum. Wa iyyakum. Wa iyyakum. All right, there are no more questions, and we're going to end it here. Ameen. You as well. Okay, there's just one more thing in my notes that just came up, but it was in my notes. I just didn't remember to tell it to you. During Al-Isra wal Mi'raj, I guess it's Al-Isra. Prophet Muhammad SAW was offered both milk and wine, and he chose the milk instead of the wine. And Jibril confirmed that you've chosen correctly, and this is an indication that that his ummah is rightly guided. As far as the Quranic references to Al-Isra wal Mi'raj, you can see it in Surah Al-Isra. That's the 17th chapter of the Quran. قال الله تعالى في كتابه بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله لنريه من آياتنا إنه هو السميع البصير. The translation of that is, exalted is he who took his servant by night from Al-Masjid al-Haram to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, whose surroundings we have blessed to show him of our signs. Indeed, he is the hearing, the seeing. So in that verse, you can see the word Subhanallah Asra. Asra is, he's mentioned, night journey. Bi'abdihi layla min al-Masjid al-Haram. Masjid al-Haram is the sacred masjid, which is the Kaaba. Ila Masjid al-Aqsa, which means the farthest masjid, but that is Al-Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, whose surroundings we have blessed. And it is also mentioned again, some of the events are mentioned also in Surah An-Najm, when Allah says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وَلَقَدْ رَآهُ نَزْلَةً أُخْرَى عِنْدَ سِدْرَةِ الْمُنْتَهَى عِنْدَهَا جَنَّةُ الْمَأْوَى. It mentions a tree that Prophet Muhammad saw, which is the low tree, which he saw at the utmost boundary, which is the highest heaven. The translation of those verses are, and he certainly saw him in another descent at the low tree of the utmost boundary. Near it is the garden of refuge. This is what Prophet Muhammad saw I don't want to say mystical, but the low tree that is in the highest heaven. And from this tree, there were two rivers running through it. And I don't want to misquote the hadith, so I'll just stop there because I forgot some of it. I forgot some of the details. I'll leave it alone on that. But the low tree was a tree that Prophet Muhammad saw in the highest heaven. And I sent the link to the hadith. You can read it there. It should give clarification there, inshallah. But those two surahs have some of the information about Al-Isra wal Mi'raj. And if that's it, we're going to close out here then, inshallah. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Inshallah, we'll be back next week.